All right, welcome to supply chain management. We're going to talk just a little bit in this video. I want to cover the subject of integration, right? So we know that there are various components to your supply chain, right? So we kind of talked about that. We talked about kind of the broad picture of supply chain, how from beginning to end there are these different components, and they each have their own responsibilities. They each have their own things that they are producing, things that they're responsible for, things that that help push resources from raw materials all the way to finished product at the consumer. And so each of these different components, though, are often dependent in some ways on what's going on in the other components, that there is a certain level of dependence. For example, if you're producing computer chips and you need silicone, right, which is one of the main ingredient, right? That's why we call it Silicon Valley. That in producing computer chips, you need the raw material of silicone. And so you may have a certain number of sales, right? If they're not already sold, perhaps you've got a sales projection, what you think you're going to sell. And so particularly the larger a company is, often they have to have some level of projection, because you can't just wait until you get an order for 2 million chips or something like that, and then start producing them immediately. So, I mean, there's often some either preliminary talks or some kind of, pre-production so that you've got them on hand, and then you begin to sell them, because you don't want to have orders that you can't fulfill. So depending on the organization and how they manage that, often organizations may start the production process ahead of time in anticipation of future sales, so they've got inventory on hand. Some companies do a just-in-time method, where they wait until they get an order and then they produce them then, and so different companies handle that differently. But what I want to show you is the dependence, right? So if you've got these plans as a computer chip company to produce all these computer chips, and so everything from you down to the consumer is set, right? You've talked with your retailer, they're going to place an order for 1 million chips, and so you've got a couple different retailers, perhaps even, that you've negotiated sales contracts with, and they're going to sell your computer chips, and so you've got that in place, right? And then you've got the shipping in place from your facilities, your warehouses, to the retailer. You know who's going to handle all that. You've got everything from you down in place. And then on the other side, everything's fine. You've got a contract with the raw materials company. They're going to ship in the silicone. But then they give you a call, and they say, hey, we've had some problems in one of our mines. Due to weather, we haven't been able to extract as much silicone out of the mine as we had hoped, and so we're behind on schedule, right? And so because you don't get the silicone, you've got everything in place to now produce all of these chips, but you don't have the raw materials to get it done. So you were dependent in that scenario on the other people down the line, and then the retailer, who now is expecting to be able to sell your brand new chip in their computer retail store, is dependent on you to get them the chip. And so there are dependencies down the line. And so because there are dependencies, integration and communication become very important for supply chain, right? If they know there's going to be a delay, they need to communicate that, right? Or if this company here has negotiated sales contracts for 1 million of these things, they really should give a heads up. If that's a larger than usual order, there needs to be some communication between them and their supplier saying, hey, there's a potential that we may have a larger order here, so that you can begin to get ready. So that's one example of integration. Another example would be just the fact that, say, if I'm regularly producing 1 million microchips, right? I don't necessarily need a shipment of silicone every single day, right? They're going to ship me in enough to do my 1 million chips, and then I'm going to produce those, and they can't go ahead and send me enough for another million and another million and another million, I'd have nowhere to put that. So there's got to be some kind of integration there. And so what often they will do is have a system set up where when we get, say, 80% through our supply of silicone, an automatic order is triggered with our supplier to replenish our supplies, right? And so that is communication that we're talking about between the different components within a supply chain. And so there's really two main branches of communication and integration. One deals with communication within your business, right? So in terms of the supply chain, it's not all from your company to another company. Once that silicone gets here, then maybe you've got other orders of other raw materials that come in, and then those raw materials are maybe sent to a raw materials storage facility, right? And then there are individuals responsible for making sure that those raw materials show up to the manufacturing facility when they're needed, right? And then the manufacturing facility begins to build the computer chip, right? And then these computer chips go to a different part of the facility where they begin to package them, and then they go to a different part of the facility where they take them in their completed package and begin to box them and prepare them for shipping and put them on crates and in boxes and pallets and that kind of stuff, and get them prepared to go on a truck to be shipped out. And so all of that, those different components are taking place within your warehouse, within your company, right? And so there are components to the supply chain that are specific just to your organization. And then there are relationships in the supply chain that are your organization to another organization, like your supplier or your retailer, right? So when you're talking about integration and communication along the different parts, it's both, right? You know, you need to be able to communicate well within your organization, and you need to be able to communicate well with other organizations that you are dependent on, right? Okay, so in terms of communication and being able to have an efficient system, it's really, well, for a larger company, it's not something that an individual does. I mean, you can't have a person going down the line with a clipboard trying to count how many gallons of product you have on the shelf there, right? Particularly if you're making large quantities of things with these larger warehouses where, I mean, they've got hundreds of things being produced every hour, and it's just a well-oiled machine there, that you've got to be able to have a more efficient system than having some guy trying to go down the line and put check marks trying to count how many gallons of a particular, raw material you have, or trying to go back in and see and count on the shelves how many products you have left that you want to ship out. There's got to be an automated system, right? And so in a smaller company, mom and pop, startup kind of thing, you're not going to have an automated system. And so, you're not going to have, but on the other hand, you're not going to have so many raw materials and so many products that you couldn't count them yourself or hire somebody to do it for you initially. Now, you can automate a little bit. There is software out there that you can buy that can help you track inventory. I know QuickBooks is one that not only do they help you with your financial accounting and that kind of stuff, but they also have some inventory management options on there where you can somewhat keep track of some things, even automated at a smaller level, right? But when you start getting much larger, it is a much more efficient and complicated system of measurement, right? So there's got to be monitoring systems. There's got to be some kind of computer system that is monitoring how many of these things that you make. I mean, think about like a company like a potato chip company or something. When it comes time to do 4th of July or any of these holidays where there's going to be like Memorial Day or something like that, where there's a lot of picnics, outdoor things, their anticipated sales are through the roof, and so their production is not linear, where they produce the same at the factory at every time. They produce in different cycles. So depending on the month, if it's April and they're producing chips that are going to be sold in May, or if it's June and they're producing chips to be sold in July during 4th of July, sales go way up, production goes way up compared to normal months, right? And so the idea is that during those peak seasons, imagine having to produce 1 million chips a week, right? Who's counting that, right? I mean, obviously you can't have an individual counting that. And so as the chips pass through a sensor, the sensor is calculating how many have been produced, right? So that you have almost like a dashboard, if you will, on someone's computer. They have access to the marketing system, to the manufacturing system there, and it shows readouts of how many they have produced, and so they need to be able to see that. And then as things come in on trucks, it's automatically entered into the database there, and so anybody at any given time can see how much of a particular product is on there. And they often have a very sophisticated mechanism where the number of chips produced, they know how much of a given raw material it took to make that, and so they can, as raw materials are pulled into the manufacturing line, they're automatically deducted from the supply inventory database and things like that. And so however you do that as a company is going to be unique to the company, because every company has a slightly different process. But the idea is the same. There needs to be an integration of that, because the larger you get and the faster these things are moving through, the more a mess up in inventory can shut down the whole thing, right? If you run out of even one ingredient in the chip, then everything has to shut down, right? I mean, you can't make it without a full inventory of everything that's needed to make it. And so it's imperative that they keep these things on hand, but it's kind of a delicate balance. If you're this chip manufacturer, you can't just order enough potatoes for the whole year, right? Because they'll be stale and rotted by the time. So you've got to have a flow, and you've got to say, okay, these are our projected sales. So this is our projected production, right? And if this is our projected production, then we're going to have a projected order, right, of potatoes. And so this month we plan on producing 2 million bags of chips. We need X amount of potatoes. And so there is communication that takes place there. So I guess what I want you to see is that the quicker you can get that process automated in some way, the better it is, right? And so a lot of times these things are, like I said, very efficient, right? It's computer-based. And even the parts that are not computer-based, that require some human interaction, where it's not just a computer ordering randomly, it's a computer perhaps suggesting an order, and then they have kind of a check and balance where the computer suggests the order, and the ordering director, or whatever their position is, will come in and review it to make sure that what is going out is what they want going out, that there's not any unique things that month that they may want to address or whatever. And so, but however you automate it, the quicker you can automate your system, the better. And as a small business owner, even if it's just something as simple as QuickBooks and trying to get some kind of inventory management system going, it will help you to be efficient, right? And efficiency helps you to put your energy in other areas, right? That's a real killer of small business, is if they don't have some of these things automated, then their 1 or 2 employees are spending all their time doing busy work, checking and making sure they've got enough things and all that kind of stuff, and then they run out of something, so everything has to halt. They got to go to the store and get it, and their supply chain is not efficient enough to allow them to ever break out of being a small mom and pop store, right? Because those delays in sales and delays in production all begin to pull back on profits and things of that nature. So in terms of running your organization, whether you're a small company or a large, automation is really the key, and using technology to your advantage is really important for supply chain management. Kind of the way the process goes, as far as integration, just so that kind of the chain reaction, if you will, is that you want to have technology that allows you to share and communicate, right? Sometimes this is human communication, right? So if you're there and you say, you know what, we just got an order in, and I think it's going to be the largest order we've had this year, Or we got a surprise order in, right? So maybe you're selling a bunch of potato chips, just to use that example, and Yankee Stadium calls and says, hey, we want to feature your potato chips at our stadium during the baseball season, and so we're going to go ahead and stock up on some potato chips. And so all of a sudden now your sales went a little higher than what you were expecting, and so somebody's got to then be able to call and communicate that in some way, whether it's email, automated system, automated order, something. There's got to be some form of communication to your supplier. And there's got to be some form of communication to your manufacturing people. Let them know you need to adjust your schedule. You may have to do some overtime with some individuals to produce a little bit more, or whatever it is. You've got to make sure. Don't make the same amount that you did last month, because we sell 8 types of potato chips, but the stadium's going to sell these 3 types. So those 3 types sales need to go up on, or production needs to go up on, rather. And so it begins with having a system in place where information can be shared, right? And it could be within your company, or it can be between your company and another company. But there needs to be some process where information can be shared, the exchange of data. And the exchange of data, or being able to just communicate and collaborate with different components in the supply chain, leads to the ability to plan together, right? So if you say, hey, our sales are going to go up, then you can communicate the other areas of the supply chain, and you can begin to formulate a plan, right? But the plan doesn't happen if there's not an in-place communication system. So you've got your in-place communication system. You know how to get a hold of every component in your supply chain when changes occur, and they know how to get a hold of you, right? If a machine breaks, the other people in the supply chain need to know, hey, it's going to be a 3-week delay because we've got a manufacturing problem on the plant, or something like that. Let's slow down the order, put the order on hold, because if those potatoes show up, we don't have anything to do with them because we can't produce for another 3 weeks. Our machine's broke, or something. There needs to be communication 2 ways, which then leads to better planning, right? You can collaborate together. And then which leads to better workflow, right? So if you're able to plan together, delays, stops, overages, shortages, any of the things that affect efficiency can be ironed out before they happen when there's good coordination and good planning, right? That's really what you're after, is an efficient system. And then being able to adjust workflow often leads to the ability to redesign things. The more you communicate with other areas, the more you become aware of bottlenecks, right? A bottleneck is anytime you got more coming in than what's going out. And so because there's good communication between the different components of your supply chain, if they're having trouble, say they're backed up, they will communicate that to you. And by having this good system in place, you'll begin to notice areas where you're getting consistent communication. You're thinking, man, that department's always calling me and telling me that they're running behind. So as an organizational manager, you don't look at that just right off the bat and say, oh, they must be lazy down there. You look at that and say, man, how we have our system set up is not working for them, right? Now, it could be that they're lazy. That's always an option. But more than likely what it is you've got a system failure. You need to give them an extra machine, a couple extra employees, something to remove the bottleneck. But you'll never know about that without good communication, right? And so the good communication allows good planning, which speeds up your workflow, which allows you to identify problems much easier, which then obviously then goes back in and produces greater results for you, right? Okay, so integration is a key part. And then one kind of last thought is that within your organization, the different components that you control, right? So you don't really control the supplier, you don't control the retailer if you're the manufacturer, right? Or if you're the retailer, you don't control the manufacturer or the supplier, right? Depending on where you're at, different companies, you have an integration, you have a certain level of trust, you have certain levels of expectations from them, but you don't necessarily have control over them. You have control over your unit, over your organization. But even within your own organization, there can be a diversity of goals, right? So that's why it's very important for the senior management and the senior leadership team, whoever's over the overall production of the company, needs to establish common goals, right? Because if you leave the goals up to individual departments, you end up getting competing goals, right? Because think about it this way, like in marketing, their main thing is that they want to have higher sales revenue, right? So that's their primary goal. If it's manufacturing, they want to have efficiency, right? If it's the warehouse, they want to make sure that inventory control is the predominant thing, right? So the manufacturing people, they may want to crank through a whole bunch of these things and just go ahead and get this stuff produced. And so if you leave that up to them and they have no communication as far as goals, if there's not an integrated system of goals, your manufacturers, they may just produce and produce and produce because efficiency is what's important to them in production. But your warehouse people are thinking, man, we're paying all this extra money in warehousing stuff because they're producing too much, right? And so your warehouse people then are getting frustrated because they want to have some kind of inventory control here, and so they're doing their best in the warehouse, but they're frustrated because they're producing so much that it makes it difficult for them to run an efficient warehouse, right? Or you've got your marketing people and they're interested in sales revenue, right? And so they're maybe pushing the extremes of the envelope, and your production people are saying, man, right now with the system we have, you're sending us too many sales. We can't keep up at a high quality because you've put so much into marketing. And so there's got to be a collaboration of goals, right? Because if you just leave it up to each individual department, they will do what's best for their department, and they will go to an extreme within their department, and the extreme within their department puts a strain on other departments. It naturally happens that way. So there's got to be a common set of goals, right? So that's why it's important often for the management to come in and have sales projections. The sales projections give everyone a guideline about how much raw materials we should order, how much we should produce in the manufacturing, how much we need to keep on hand in the warehouse, how much we need to invest in marketing in order to hit our sales goals. And so by having some type of common sales projection that's kind of disseminated through the company, it gives everyone a standard to operate against, right? So that they say, hey, you know what? The company wants us to produce this much. Now you have the option, if sales did increase, that maybe you can make some adjustments. It's not set in stone, but there needs to be an organizational standard that says this is what you should be producing, this is what you should be ordering, this is what you should be holding on to and managing in the warehouse, and you don't leave those things up to individual units. You establish that. Now, how they operate and how they achieve what you have given to them, often you want to maybe delegate that and say, hey, listen, this is your goal on a day-to-day basis. You know how to operate this plant in order to make sure by the end of the month you hit this goal. I leave the scheduling and all that kind of stuff up to you, but understand this is your goal. And you create this company-wide goal, which creates company-wide unity, right? Because there's no one department that is putting so much stress on the other departments that they can't coexist together properly. And so having a consistent goal that is communicated consistently to everyone in the organization helps the different departments to operate at a higher level of efficiency, right? Okay. All right, so the main thing I want you to get out of this lesson is there has to be a communication strategy in your company, whether it's small or whether it's large. The larger you get, obviously, the more complicated your communication strategy becomes, right? And the greater the challenge is to keep it simple, right? You don't want it to stay complicated. You've just got more variables coming in because you're a larger company. And so it may be a more complicated system to simplify it. You understand? Because you still don't want it complicated. You want it to be, when it's all said and done, fairly simple, that it operates smoothly, right? But in order to achieve simplicity, there's often a complicated computer system operating that makes everything run smoothly and simply, right? Okay. So that's the main thing out of this lesson, is to begin to think about, for your business and your industry, what does communication look like? How will you go about doing it? What areas are more important for communication than others? How do you plan on doing it? Is it going to be an individual? Is it going to be automated? Is it going to be a combination of the two? What suppliers and retailers do you need to communicate with, and how will you communicate with them? Particularly if you're a smaller company, that's generally where you have to rely on an individual. If you're a smaller company and you're trying to connect with a larger company, or even they could be small too, but if you're connecting with your supplier and you're a small company, maybe you don't have the automated system at that point to do automatic reorders and things like that. So you may have to call them and give an actual, over the phone order, or go on their website and order it manually, whatever. But the larger you get, the more you have the capacity to be automated between other businesses as well, right? So even as a small business, because of things like QuickBooks and inventory management and stuff like that, you can be fairly automated within your own business. And the larger you get, the more options you have of becoming automated between you and your retailers and between you and your suppliers.